Thank you for being here for our midday game design talk this afternoon. We're really excited to have Greg Lane and Chris Burns here from Exit 73 Games to talk about their really exciting new upcoming game called #Blood. It seems like it's been a bit of a journey in terms of like where it was starting and where it's now going, and we're excited to have you share your process with us. So without any further wait, I give you Greg Lane and Chris Burns.
Hey everyone.
Howdy, howdy. That's right, we're Exit 73 Games, which is an offshoot of Exit 73 Studios, and we're working on the action-adventure game called #Blood. So Chris, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yes, my name's Chris Burns. I'm the animation director and animator for the game #Blood. They mentioned Exit 73 Studios. I'm co-owner of that, as well as part co-owner of Exit 73 Games. I've been in the animation industry for 20 years, working professionally, and this is sort of our first foray into gaming as our collective group of artists and programmers and writers.
Nice. And I'm Greg. I've started full-time in games around 2011. I did Flash games at first. I've done indie games. I was did community stuff at Unity for a while. I was at Big Huge Games. That's what I live here in Maryland. So that's what brought me here, because there's a pretty vibrant scene of studios here in Maryland, which is great. I've taken some of the knowledge that I've learned under the hashtag the joy of game design on Twitter. So every game that I play, I'd pull out one nugget of game design that I sort of learned from and put it on there. So if you're interested at all in that, about learning more tips and stuff like that. But that's neither here nor there. We are talking today about history and cartoons and video games and all sorts of stuff like that. Because yeehaw, who doesn't want history in the middle of a Wednesday? I'm going to start first by saying that there's been a long history of cartoon games where the idea that you take an IP that is a cartoon and you turn it into a game, and they all have been very video game like. They've got health systems and meters, you've got goals that you accomplish and things like that. This is Spongebob, Adventure Time, and if this is one from the 90s, this is Tailspin. This had come up in our office as a discussion point earlier. So there have been all sorts of cartoon tie-ins for games, but the idea of using animation in games itself, having the hand-drawn feel and look, has been somewhat of a technical hurdle until 1983. That's right. If you'd guessed it, 1983 was your guess at Dragon's Lair. 10 points to you and a cookie. I know that over Zoom sometimes the video gets a little glitchy, so we're going to do some animated things like this. We're also going to hopefully show some videos. Please apologize if there's any glitchiness there, except for this clip. This, if it's glitchy at all in your system, runs fairly close to how the arcade game runs. They had created this game. It was with Don Bluth, correct, Chris?
That's correct. Yes. Secret of Nim, a bunch. He was an ex-Disney animator that sort of went out on his own. So I really aspired to be him too.
He did this in the 80s where the whole thing was done on Laserdisc. So you would play it, they would show a short clip of the game, and then you would get a chance to interact. You'd push the button or you'd move the joystick, and then it would load the next section of the game and then show you the following clip. So it was really herky-jerky. There were a lot of blank screens where it moved from one animation clip to the other animation clip. And so for as smooth and as beautiful as parts of this were, turning it into a game was technically feasible, but had a couple of holes. The next big jump, as everybody knows, probably your other guess, was this one. This has been something that our studios looked at. You played this more recently, right, Chris?
Oh yeah, me and my sons love this game for different reasons. I love it for the cartooniness of it. I love that the medium was done so well and so 1930s-esque, and it really approached gaming from just an art perspective. So I really love the way they sort of did that, and you can understand why I gravitated towards that for sure.
Oh, precisely. And this is something that we are trying to hopefully capture, that same feeling of both watching a cartoon and playing an interactive, more of an interactive cartoon, and or more like watching a video game, somewhere in the intersection
Mhm.
where those two things sort of meet. I do want to preface this also by saying that like full scale, full on game animation like this is not the only way to have animation done in a game. And I think Chris is going to step us through a couple of other places where they've
Sure.
done animation in games. So we're going to hop over to that and we're going to do a couple of examples. Let's see if this video loads. I don't know if there's going to be audio, but it'd be fine if there's not. We'll be able to talk over it. So cool. Chris, what game is this?
This game is an independent game called Fu Kickball. We've done actually animated 2 trailers for this, and we had a heavy influence on the eventual design of the game. We were approached, they just wanted an intro, they wanted it very action heavy. They gave us a few very kind of basic ideas for characters, and they kind of let us sort of design the characters throughout the intro. So we took this approach. We've worked on IPs like OKKO seems to be the one people seem to know the most about. So we definitely were influenced by the Cartoon Network kind of aesthetic, and we approached it that way. So we actually have 2 of these trailers. The game just released actually about a month ago, and from what I understand, it's doing really well. So it was it was fun. This was just pure animation though. We had no real say in how the game played or anything. We were just sort of we're just brought on to make an intro to kind of introduce these characters.
Right. And it was done as a wrapper to the game. The game sort of then was built and separate. You had mentioned OKKO and you had animations inside that game, correct?
Yes, we were pretty close friends with the creator of OKKO, a guy by the name of Ian. He likes our studio, luckily, and he asked us to do some of the cutaway animations for his game, which started as a Cartoon Network show called OKKO, the same title. So we got there, and I think we did around 30 minutes of animation, which doesn't sound like a lot probably to the layman, but it's an incredible amount of animation for a smaller studio like ours. And yeah, with this one was the commercial we actually animated for it. It's playing a little jerky, but the spirit's there.
Yeah. And what are the constraint differences between doing a trailer for a game versus doing doing the cutscenes internally in a game?
Well, the trailer we could animate in any way we please. We could make it as long as we want. There's no like parameters in terms of size we could use for the like memory of it, because we're just sending over a QuickTime. But for this game in particular, when you're trying to make a game like that, you have to render it down to almost a bite-sized piece so it doesn't lag the game, in other words. And then we're provided audio with the OKKO game, so we would have to animate within the audio parameters of that, which is pretty typical in animation. Yeah, so the trailer gave us a lot more leeway in terms of artistic vision and stuff, where this one we had the character designs sort of set in place and the audio, so it was really just kind of working to the narrative in that one, where the trailer was just sort of off the hinges.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then as people expect, let's see if we can go to the next slide. Technology will stop fighting me. There we go. I wanted to show the trailer. This is our most recent. This came out last summer, right? Was when we recut this?
Yes, we had some new cutaways and new gameplay footage.
So #Blood is about the adventure of Becky Brewster. She finds out that she is a vampire fighting machine, and she goes through the mystery of why there are so many vampires in this town and what's happening to all the residents. And she needs to balance that with field hockey practice and high school homework and making friends and that kind of stuff. So we started this 2019.
2019, I believe.
Yeah.
We started the game itself. Yeah. Yes.
And so that's the game #Blood that we'll dive deeper into through the rest of this presentation.
Sure.
All right, stop that and we'll go to the next slide. Cool. The design of Blood. So we'll go over some of the logistics and some of the history on like how we got together and that kind of stuff. So you'd mentioned this was our sort of first game. The first game as a collective group.
Correct.
So Chris, you guys actually started out with sort of a totally different project and a different process, right? For Blood.
Absolutely. We well, animation scheduling can be quite volatile. So Blood was sort of born out of the idea for Blood. Was born out of my co-worker right here, Bob, and I were kind of in a holding pattern for a Disney pilot we were producing. And instead of kind of dragging our feet and waiting for Disney to sort of get the script to us, we decided to cut a little trailer for this new idea we had. So in the middle of our pilot, we came up with this vampire hunting idea. We cut together a trailer. It was around 45 seconds, and then Disney came back in and we started our pilot again. So we just had this sort of 45-second Easter egg of an idea that we just kind of brushed aside because we're such a small studio, like I said. And it sat there for a bit. And our good friend Cody, who's one of the programmers on this game, came to us years later and asked us if we would be interested in making a game. And we've always been very game centric, so of course. And he was kind of just siphoning through some of the pitch packets we made, and when he came across Blood, he was like, this would make an actual better video game than the idea itself of just the cartoon. And that's sort of like the light bulb moment for all of us. And we're like, yeah, let's try to do this. So that's sort of the truncated version of getting to where we were in 2019, right before we kicked off as a team.
It had been nice. It had snowballed nicely. Cody then had shared it with me. Cody had filtered a lot of your games and your animation and other stuff to me over the years.
Sure.
He and I worked at Fun Tank in Manhattan, my first game job. So we wound up being friends, and he wound up showing me some other stuff. And when it came to Blood, he's like, "Hey, we're doing this thing. Do you want to write some dialogue for it? Do you want to maybe balance some game design stuff for it? Do you want to come up with some scenarios?" And that seemed really great. And then we got our friend Andrew on board, who also worked with us in Manhattan, to round out our team of 5. So it was nice to do that thing of like, you get to practice your craft for a while, meet a lot of great people in the industry, and then be like, all right, let's put these two things together. Let's sort of make this work. That first demo that we did, you basically did an animation first, right? Before we built a game. For what was that for?
That was for MagFest 2019, and we in a little bit of a fast one we pulled. I animated something that looked like gameplay, and then the programmers had to retrofit that into making the game. But before we could even submit, we needed a trailer, so we kind of faked an animation of getting it into there, and we got accepted. And then we had a very short amount of time to kind of string together a demo with our feet to the flames. Now that we got accepted, we couldn't turn it down necessarily. So it was a little bit of reverse engineering, I suppose. But that's the way we're kind of working now too. I provide some of the animations, the programmers then take the character and the backgrounds we provide and make it look like the animation we're sort of trying to create to make it feel like a cohesive cartoon.
Right, that strikes exactly to the core of exactly. It should feel like a cartoon, should look like a cartoon, should play like a cartoon. So even if we just sent them a video first of like, this is the gameplay.
Yeah,
pre-rendered, sure, but
a little disingenuous, I had to admit. But
right.
it's also a good way to sort of force yourself to make something too, which I kind of highly recommend. You put yourself in that pressure situation to see what you're made out of.
Precisely. So actually, we took that to heart. That's what's going to be the next point I was going to cover. I was going to cover that in just a minute. I did want to show this. This is the original.
This was the idea when we were just going to pitch this to Disney.
Yeah.
the design changed quite a bit from this, but the spirit of it's there.
And so yes, that's what hashtag blood started with. You so where did the name come from?
We just wanted to sort of name it like how a teenage girl might name something. In other words, so I mean, again, this was 2017 when we came up with the title of that, and the talk all the teenagers were using back then were always saying hashtag this and hashtag that. Still kind of applies, I suppose. So yeah, we did that, and we wanted to indicate that it was there was a vampire thing going on, so blood, and then we spelled blood like how you would short form it almost. So it was really just logistical, not trying to be clever.
But in doing so, it
Mhm.
came up with a couple of accidental, really great things. Number one, the use of a hashtag helped a little bit with virality. It really has helped. I mean, your art and your animation really has helped the team really show off what we're working on. So I think that really helps grab eyeballs. But I think the idea is that it's always a hyperlink, that it's always connected to the rest
It's
of the
always
Blood stuff.
connected to, yes. Yeah, no, that was the idea a little bit too. We knew it would be Twitter friendly
Yeah.
to put it on there as the actual title. Plus, if they do it in alphabetical order, we'd be ahead of the A's too. So
Yeah.
because of the icon.
So yeah, so those happy accidents came
Sure.
about early on, which was nice. You had mentioned getting ready for some live events. That was the bulk of what our production schedule was sort of like. We would sign up for an event and we would treat that sort of as our next milestone and be like, okay, for this next event, we should get these bugs fixed. We should get this next thing in. So
Yep.
this was the Unity Developer Day in New York City that Andrew and I went to. We got to show the game off there.
Sure.
Because we're using Unity, so it was nice to show it off to some Unity people. This was Awesome Con in DC. You'd mentioned MagFest. This was MagFest. We did a rug in 2020. It's this like bloody like outline thing, so people could come to our booth and hang out there. So the idea of in the before times, it was easier to do this with scheduling live events and treating them as milestones. But you can really, if your team is going to pick a date, be like, okay, we want to, on August 30th, we want to put out a trailer or whatever, just, sort of work backwards from a big thing. Or this week is GDC, for example. So if you like, hey, we wanted a big trailer for GDC. So think about like, all right, we want to release it the week beforehand. So how much time does that give us? So think about what your next milestone is as you're building your game, and you'll be able to sort of build it in increments. Even
Absolutely.
if it was, at that point, this was a nights and weekends thing. So that really,
yeah. No, I was always kind of surprised how much we got done, since we all had full-time jobs and families and mortgages and everything that comes with adult life. To get that there as a sweat equity kind of project, I was always very impressed with what the programmers were able to pull off.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We got a couple of great guys working
on
this.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to jump to today. This is the most recent thing that we put out. These are the hatchlings. Chris, do you want to talk about what we're doing here with these guys and stuff?
Okay, so I put together this in the same way I sort of put together the trailer. I strung together a bunch of animation to make what looks like a cartoon scene. Now, all these are set up as individual sprites, so it's playing a little choppy, but we're doing a top-down adventure, so all these characters have walk cycles in every direction, the diagonals, up, down, and left and right. So each time they turn, it triggers a new sprite. So what you see here, it's all the same character, but I duplicated it. But I think this is the byproduct of around 1,100 drawings just to get them, before they even attack or react to Becky or get hurt by Becky, the the very first thing I start with the sprites is how are they going to move. So just before anything gets done, I think we're at the 11 or 1200 frames of animations or sprites for this. So it's a pretty laborious sort of game we're working on. It's a ton of drawings, in other words. And then, then we did all the attacks and every hit from every angle. So this one character, I think it's at 848 frames right now but I'm knock on wood, I think he's done.
Is there any of that that we're reusing, or is there any of that is different in different angles or different directions and that kind of stuff?
Well, all the walk cycles from every different angle I couldn't reuse, but there's some sort of like we call them sort of recoil animations where if they get hit, we'll reuse that in almost every angle. But it's still, I have to animate the recoil from every angle. So there's 5 directions. I try to make every character symmetrical. So if he's walking left to right, it's the same as right to left and up and down and vice versa. So it's, it would be 5 directions for each one, but each angle we need the reaction of each thing. So that's where you get those numbers like that, the 1800 number.
Nice.
And the same with most characters on that. So it's going to be a ton of drawings by the time we set sail.
And not just drawings, there's going to be a ton of characters. So this is our vampire table of the different enemies that we're thinking about adding or sort of prototype adding or sketching out at this point. And with that last animation, we're only looking here with the hatchling vampires. Those are the little guys, and the mother nest. She was the one in the middle.
Yep.
So if you think about like that number of frames per different enemies with different attack types, different loadouts, and different things like that. So we're looking at quite an involved process for you and Bob.
Yeah, absolutely. The demo itself, though, I think we counted the sprites. Now that includes background sprites, but I remember the number 20,000 being floated around. I don't think I'm making that up. I think Andrew told us that, one of our programmers. We're kind of floating around the 20,000 mark for the demo, and this is all new stuff. So you can sort of do the math for what we hope to be a 7-hour game. It's going to be probably in the 6 figures of worth of drawings by the time we're done.
Nice.
Yeah.
So cool. We've got some of that stuff thought about. Next, we're going to jump to some of the pillars of our game. Some of the specifically nostalgic pillars, like how did we get to where we got to? Other than the great 40-second animation you did, like what are the couple of design pillars that we did? Design pillars are traditionally 3 to 8 points that your game or your experience is built around. It could be having something different to do every time you load the game, or having a world that players want to explore, or things like the fun comes first. Those are different studios design their pillars in different ways. On this, I've linked a couple of Insomniac. It's got 4 pillars of design, and these are the pillars that we're designing for that were designed for Destiny. I didn't work on either of these games, but these are out there as public examples of how to design your guiding pillars of the game. We took a hybrid approach of like those traditional game pillars and the MDA framework of mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics, the way the game plays and the way it looks and the interaction between the two. We wanted to think about the way the game looks because that's such a heavy pillar for us, the way the game plays because that's the way the player interacts with it. And then we also wanted to look into the zeitgeist, essentially. We wanted to pull nostalgia specifically into this. So those were our 3 that we essentially picked: the way the game plays, the theming of the game, and the way that it looks. And to that end, we looked into the 80s and 90s. Hooray! This was formidable decades for our team. So no surprise that it had a heavy way that it played into the way that we thought about design and the things that we wanted to emulate. The first being mechanically, design-wise, some of the big things that came to mind immediately was Zelda. That sort of top-down, the world feels big and expansive. There's lots of stuff to explore. There's also here, this is the Ninja Turtles arcade game. There's also some of that as we've been able to build the game more, we have expanded our influences. That's got much more of a brawler type feel to it. We've been thinking about different way that combat works, different way that the heroes interact with the world, different ways that the enemies can interact with the heroes and things like that. So as far as design wise goes, these are a couple of the games that we're looking at for like influence that way. For overall theming, obviously, it's got vampires, it's got a female front. So we're looking at Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's got great snarky writing. It's got some of those good horror elements. It's got teenage drama. So there's a lot of things here that we hope to emulate and pull in. And finally, on the art perspective, we're looking at those cartoons of the mid to late 90s to early 2000s. I think you called out earlier, Samurai Jack was particularly influential when you were doing the first illustration, right, Chris?
Oh yeah, Gendy Tartakovsky was easily one of my favorite artists of all time. Best creator. I think he's a visual storytelling genius. Just yes, everything about what he does, I'm heavily influenced by him for sure. Absolutely.
And we found that a lot of people our age and even a little younger, like, find it appealing too. It's an instant grab. It's a good way to like call in of like, hey, I'd like these things as individual elements. Man, somebody's like, you got chocolate in my peanut butter moment of like, we put all these things together and it's turning out to be something that people really want to share and something that we want to share with others.
Sure.
So as far as like that lens of nostalgia, I did want to take a look at like when these things like came out of like, all right, so around 90, 89, 91, you get Turtles in Time, you get Legend of Zelda. Mid 90s, you get that Dexter's Lab and Johnny Bravo. You get Powerpuff Girls shortly after that. And then late 90s, you get Interview with a Vampire already. That was in 94. You get Blade in 98 and Buffy. So vampires are a big thing all throughout. So all we did was sort of pick these couple of things, added them to the blender. And then in 2020, 2022-ish, we're now in full development of Blood. So we let it all percolate here. Be influenced in our youth, let it percolate and build our team, build our own personal experiences, and then move into full development. So we've got these three pillars. We're talking about making it as much of a cartoon as possible. But that's not without conflict. There's going to be points where the cartoon doesn't feel like a cartoon because of the game, because the game gets in the way, or there's got to be ways that we design enemies based on the specific mechanics that we need. We showed you the table before of all the vampires that we're hoping to have. So we need to think about like mechanically this vampire has to do that, or mechanically, we need something to fill this hole here. I didn't show, there's another table of monsters that we have that we tentatively added one last week of like, hey, there's a hole in this table and maybe we can have this type of monster do it because of these reasons. So conflicts and pillar. One of them that came up was this moment here. So these are Powerpuff Girls. They're just living in the moment. There's not a health bar or a level system in sight. It's just straight cartoon. So how do we make a game that has a system of progression, that has a sense of power building without health bars, without some of the visual UI stuff? And what we're currently experimenting with is giving items to power up the player and having the item boost change the number of hits that it takes the enemy to kill. So for example, we have this table that we're building out, an example, where we're sort of saying, all right, if we get a light upgrade from the base damage, there's really no change. All this red is basically no change. That's basically the same. If we do a different number, a little higher bump, then we can see, okay, it takes fewer hits within this range. It takes even fewer hits within this range. We can start to see a step off based on how much upgrade we give. So if she's got a weapon or a punch or a kick or something, if she gets new boots, if she gets a new amulet, if she gets something to upgrade her power, she's able to defeat these enemies with taking fewer and fewer hits. So we're looking to find some sweet spots on how much power to give the player, so it's not in an endless slog of hit points, but also be able to feel that sense of progression without needing a health bar over every player, or without having some other things like that. I mentioned having items, and so this pencil is one of the items, and like, cool, so have a pencil. Pencil's made of wood. Wood's good for fighting vampires.
Mhm.
Was that basically your thought pattern when you came up with this, Chris, or when the team came up with this?
Well, it was twofold. One, it would be an item you find, and this would happens to be the school basement. It's a school supply. Her main weapon is sort of a school supply too, so it kind of felt narratively correct that you would find a pencil at school, and a stake to the heart, a wood stake to the heart of a vampire would work. So it looked like a good stabbing apparatus. So yeah, that was sort of the thought. Um, we're kind of making a very Zelda-esque game, but how do we take it to a world that's like a school-age child or a school-age teenager? Obviously, you wouldn't be carrying around a sword or anything like that, so we're kind of using the equipment that you would find in an everyday school or an everyday like town, and kind of applying the Zelda mystique to that with those items, like the magic and everyday items, in other words.
Exactly, right. So
Mhm.
our parallel here is the arrows in Zelda. I looked at how much damage there were. We did a lot of competitive analysis with some games. When you get the chance to play a game, you should sit down with a notepad if you get the chance, because it allows you to like stop and be like, all right, how much damage is this doing? How much am I buying it for? How many charges do I get? Is there a way to expand the arrow slots? There's a lot of mechanics that are going in just to the arrows alone, not only the whole combat system, but just specifically the arrows. Has got a lot of things going on that we need to think about instead of just saying like, okay, we're going to add throwing pencils. Good, we're going to add throwing pencils, but we need to make sure that we've got all these other bases covered. So if you look at the chart on the left, this is that cost and damage split for the length of the past. We've reworked our numbers a little bit for our game, but this is tentatively what we're looking at. We're looking at spending basically 4 in-game currency dollars. You'll get about 8 pencils. That runs about 50 cents per pencil. That gives you about a third of a point of damage per pencil, per 50 cents. And that falls in line with some of the other weapons that we'll have, Holy Water Super Soaker or Garlic or things like that. We're still brainstorming a lot of these things. But we're looking at a price per damage use of weapons. And so when we think about adding a pencil, we do need to think about like, what's the game economy? Are we able to buy these things? Are you only going to find these things? Are you going to unlock them? Are they reusable? In the demo, they don't ever run out, right?
No.
And they kill everything. It's just
Yeah.
one hit. So that's something that for demo purposes is great. You get when somebody sits down to play your game, they feel good about being able to at least get to the boss or complete the demo. But in a longer adventure, you do need to pace things out and make sure that you're doing the right amount of damage, so that way there's not that sort of like primary strategy of like, oh, once you get the pencil, everything else is obsolete, and that's the only thing you need going forward. So that's something that we're sort of trying to balance and think about and work through.
And it's something we only really experienced when watching people play our demo. It's a way different experience when we play it. We know how the game mechanics work, but watching someone who just picks up the game do that, we then learned a lot. It was like, well, these simply are too powerful to give an infinite supply to.
Mhm.
So those events, it's great watching people play your game, but it really is a learning experience too.
And it's interesting to see how much players give you credit for. There's a lot of things, I don't know if you noticed this too, Chris, where people would be playing the demo and they'd be like, oh, I wonder what's around this corner, or I wonder if I can open these lockers yet, or I wonder if that kind of stuff, where you're like, it's a fairly linear thing. Like, you fight the dude, you punch him in the face, and you can, don't get me wrong, you can like look around and interact with the world.
Sure. Yeah.
You guys did a great job with like trash cans and mailboxes and that kind of stuff.
Just thank you.
Animate the little touches. In the demo, if you like punch some of the things or interact with the world, the trash can will fall over or the mailbox will flip the flag up. And so back to that cartoony feeling, like if you interact with something, it springs back and forth. Like everything's got this sort of life to it. The banners in the school too, as you run past the banners, they're animated to flap up and down and stuff like that. So we tried to keep it a very, very light, very alive feeling type of thing. I think one of the other things that I wanted to sort of to touch on was the idea of overnight success. This is sort of to call back to the, earlier in our talk. We mentioned that this is going to be our very first game, right? It's our very first game. It's going to be Exit 73's first game, sort of.
Yeah.
So I personally have been making games for over 10 years. You had done trailers, you had done cutscenes, you had done little indie projects. But like this one was from 20 this was also around 2017, right? Or no, this was earlier. Was this 20?
This was an idea we had with Cody. Again, we're just sort of spitballing with this one. I mean, you can see sort of not looking back that I'm kind of one note with my character design, but
I always felt like Mage Rage was sort of that spiritual successor, or Blood was the spiritual successor to this.
Well, we were making a platformer for this one, so I guess we thought, which one can we make, or can we make this 5 times harder? That's sort of what we did with that. But yeah, no, that was just kind of born out of, we have this talent pool of friends that we wanted to work with, and how could we all work together to make something? And it was really that sort of just born out of that.
Yeah. I remember this was, again, I'd mentioned previously that Cody shared a lot of stuff with me. Like I was sitting on his couch with a graph paper, and we were talking about this game and looking at this stuff, and like we wanted to have all the spells interact with other stuff.
Sure.
And we were like, oh, she's got this fire thing, so maybe the fire can burn through cobwebs and that kind of stuff. And me of that age, only having worked on games a couple of years, and mostly in like Flash stuff and casual Facebook games and stuff, I didn't have the design knowledge to make that game at that point. I didn't have a lot of great suggestions on like, oh, we can do this to solve this issue. I working on Blood now, a lot more of it has come a lot easier, because it has been like, I studied a lot of games, I played a lot of stuff, I made a wider breadth of games, and now I feel more comfortable and capable of approaching the way that this game should be designed. And I presume, Chris, you're the same way about like characters and animation and interactions, right?
Oh, absolutely. Just from when we started the demo to what we're doing now, where we're sort of reapproaching Becky, to be she's less shrouded in her cape now for all the new attacks. So we sort of, we're redoing a lot of the animation that was in the previous demo to kind of amp it up, or from what we learned, what's making it a better game. So yeah, no, we're constantly relearning and retooling, and 20 years later, I'm still learning stuff about animation for sure.
Nice. Time gives a great perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. As the last thing before we open it up to questions, I did want to take a look at time itself. So for example, in #Blood, we're looking at the 90s to draw inspiration from the early 90s for games, mid 90s for cartoons, and late 90s for theming. So I was curious, as a thought exercise, to what does that look like in the 2010s if we applied that same filter of mechanics, art, and theming on what the cartoon video game of the 2010s would look like. So in 2011, you get Minecraft and Skyrim. That kind of stuff came out at the beginning of that decade. In 2015, the CalArt style hit real big. Gumball and Steven Universe, Gravity Falls, that kind of stuff.
Sure thing.
And then throughout the entire decade, superheroes, to me, seem to be the thing that stands out. All the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that kind of stuff. So if you, sitting and listening in this class, put these things in a blender, and you wait 20 years till 2042, you too can be old and jaded giving a talk to the youngins about what was cool in your day. So this is certainly something that you can do.
I recommend not waiting 20 years like we did. We should have did this earlier.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So for example, if you did that, if you took the crafting element of Minecraft and then applied these character designs with a sort of superhero theme, right? That's sort of what we're talking about. You could make a game called Power Forge, and the tagline would be, if you don't have superpowers of your own, store-bought ones are fine. And that game is going to come out in spring of 2042. Not by us, maybe by you.
Oh, okay, along with Blood.
Yeah. So keep that in your back pocket for the future. So yeah, so that was a brief history of nostalgia and cartoons and video games and hashtag blood. If you want to know more right now, you can join our mailing list at bloodgame.com or on Twitter, Instagram, various internet places at Exit 73 Studios, or obviously hashtag blood all over the place. Yeah, I'm Greg. That was Chris. Sam, thanks so much. Thank you to MICA for letting us ramble about our game and what we're working on. And we can certainly open it up to questions.
Sure thing.
Thank you so much, Chris and Greg. So yes, we have plenty of time here. I know that we've got to get back to and into our classes here at 4 o'clock, but we have a small, intimate group. If you have some questions, just feel free to jump in. I'll also keep an eye on the chat. So if you put something there, we can raise the question that way. So hop into it. So what questions do you have for Chris and Greg?
I have one of the questions.
Sure.
First of all, it was very interesting to listen to you guys, and I'm sort of very inspired because I'm sort of like in a similar situation where me and some people that I know are constantly brainstorming ideas. And one of the things that we encounter most of the time is once we have an idea and we try to go at it, we sort of like lose track because we don't know where to start necessarily. So it would be interesting to see how you guys decided that this is the idea that you want to go through with, and like what you started with and how you build up upon that.
Yeah, well, the idea keeps evolving too. So it wasn't like we waited for the idea to be the cement to dry on that before we got started. We knew we wanted to approach it from a Zelda like world. We're all heavily influenced by Zelda. The first game I ever played in 1986 was Zelda. I've thought about it ever since. So I knew I wanted to be in that world. And from that, we just started. The way I run the studio and my coworker runs it, we're very kind of proactive about just starting something, even though it could be half-baked, and learn while you're working on it. And some might see that as wasteful, but I just feel like the act of starting can be so daunting for so many people that once you get it out of the way and you're just working on it, it gets a little easier. You get closer to the finish line. You learn a lot more about the process and stuff. So it really, for me, it was just like, let's just start. Like when we made that little 45-second pilot, I just like, we have an idea. Let's just make an idea. And it was, for me, it's sitting down and drawing, just sketching out a character, seeing how, in this case, she would move. And then, then we build on the idea. And if you go to our YouTube, we have some animated shorts. Every animated short sort of started with just that blank piece of paper we had, a fun looking character we sort of came up with, and sort of retrofit an idea around that. So if you have a game that you're heavily influenced on, or like a certain type of game, and you want to make a replica of that game or a better version of that game, I would start with that idea, and then however you start programming or designing it, kind of let it evolve while you're making it. Because you could be stuck in the pre-production loop forever if you just keep thinking about stuff. It really is, with a small group of ours, we don't have time to really think about it, almost in a weird way. We just have to be proactive and finish it.
I found that showing it to people is a great way to continue working on a game. Number one, you're accountable. When you show somebody your work, they may down the line be like, oh, I remember I played your game before. How's that coming along? And as terrifying as that is, you're like, oh, okay, somebody is interested. Somebody else is asking about the thing that I'm working on. I probably should put some more time into that. Also, they ask questions, they ask leading questions, or they'll do something when somebody else plays your game, they'll do something that will trigger a new idea or a new response. In the demo that we had, when we first took it to MagFest, in the backyard of Becky's house, there's a tree. There's a tree house, and almost everybody ran to the tree to try to climb the tree because there's a cool tree house up there. I can see it. I can get to that. But we didn't have that animated. We didn't have a climb or anything. So instead, we put a little piece of dialogue that says, hey, I want to climb up there too, but let's focus on the adventure right now. And that was it. That's all people needed. They didn't continue to try to like push up there or jam other buttons. They got a little bit of feedback from what they wanted and they moved on, and that closed the loop. And that was like, an improvement that we could make.
We should also add, we added so you can go inside the treehouse because we thought that'd be satisfying too.
Yes. Oh yeah.
So we did learn a little about that.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, show your game to people. They'll have questions about your design and it'll help you clarify it. And it'll hold you accountable to hopefully make more.
All right. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I think I have a follow-up question that's related to Matt-based questions. And one was, it's kind of like, so the process of kind of prototyping it and demoing it and getting it out in front of people. How long from the very beginning, did you know that this was something that you wanted to go so far as that you would need outside funding and an outside publisher to really get it to that place that you needed it to be? Was it always kind of at that scope for you, or was it, I know that Chris, you were just describing the process as kind of like, we're figuring some stuff out as we go along. If you were just kind of like, I don't know, we'll just kind of make this and it seems fun and we're interested and let's get in front of people to see what they think.
Sure.
What the process of thinking was like that for you in terms of like what the, the ultimate life of this thing is for other people.
I mean, I was incredibly naive with how long it would take to make a game. I didn't really apply or really even look into it. So when we started it, I remember we were talking to our buddy Cody, the aforementioned Cody, and we're like, we could get a game done in 2 years on the side. And that seemed reasonable to me. It made sense. 2 years feels like a long time, sure. So we were going to just do it on the side for 2 years and, use kind of this festival MagFest as our pillar to go there and sort of celebrate that we made a game. So we always were kind of intending to make it just on the side with sweat equity, and whatever comes of it, comes of it. It wasn't until we showed it at MagFest and it seemed to garner a lot of attention that we're like, maybe we can apply this to a full-time gig. And that's when we sort of like, let's seek out funding. The only way it will get done is if all 5 of us actually work full-time on it. So, I approached it from an incredibly naive standpoint, just thinking 2 years on the side while running and going through the rest of my life, we could do that. And, that was a very big miscue on my end anyway. So, but now it's great. Now we get to work on it full time with this incredible staff. So. Yeah.
Some of it had to come down to the right opportunity and offer to be there.
Oh yeah.
There have been some people that we talked to that are like, hey, this would be a neat game to see come to light. Like, then they would push us along or stuff like that. But we had to have a couple of things line up first before we said yes. Let's do this full time.
For sure.
And without going into like any sensitive things about that, can you talk a little bit about that process of taking it to that point where you've decided like, okay, now we are going to actually kind of try to put this in front of people, not from the perspective of them as being like our audience of players, but as our audience of potential people who will help us actually see this thing through. And the reason I'm asking is, one of the outcomes that some of our students take is they start their own small studios, they continue pushing projects they started as students here. And often the question is like, how do I actually get that, to take kind of that next step, right? They can release it independently on itch.io and they can, but to kind of make it to that part where like, for lack of a better word, to like make it kind of like real, right? To make it, to go that is like a big block. And it seems to be kind of a thing that sort of happens without a lot of like, I don't know, it's like everybody, it seems like kind of figures it out on their own in terms of it. And maybe that's what you all did. And I'm curious, like what the way you approached that was.
I think we came to a realization that working on the side was not going to finish this game to a level of satisfaction that any of us were gonna get there, or it would take so long that, it was sort of like, let's do this or not at a certain moment for us. We all love working on it. We worked on it since 2019, and none of our passion has dwindled at all since working on it. And now we got the opportunity to work on it. I fell in love with it even more. So it was that sort of realization that we're just like, if we just keep tinkering with this, just waiting for the festival year after year to get to the next spot, it just wasn't going to do it. And it was starting to affect our other work because we were just taking so much time to work on our side project for free. So we were just like, how can we make this work, in other words? And, we're just like, everyone made a serious commitment. And a lot like the micro version being Magfest and the macro version, it was like, well, there's 5 uh 5 families right now, because we all each member has children and stuff. So we have a lot on the line now. And now that was sort of the commitment. It wasn't just like, let's get to Magfest. No, it's like, let's make a game, let's make it to the best of our ability, and let's take the time to do it right with the time and our studio's resources.
I think some of the sweat equity that Chris mentioned is a good way to prepare to pitch to a publisher.
Yes,
we had a full demo that you can play. It was roughly a 20-minute demo. So having something that you can play all the way through. The fact that the game has got a hashtag helped its use on social media. So we had a number of tweets or posts or things that were on there that said like, hey, look, it's got this many number of likes, it's got this many number of retweets, showing that we had a following before we needed to ask somebody for money, made them feel like it was more of a sure bet. So anything that you can do, if you get a write-up on Rock Paper Shotgun, if you can get into we got an Edge magazine, we got a little 2-page in Edge magazine, we were on Rock Paper Shotgun. Anytime you can get into the press, so that way you could take that to the possible publisher too, of like, hey, we're being written about. A number of people, I don't even know how they found us to begin with, started putting us on YouTube lists of like, hey, here are a whole bunch of upcoming Zelda-like games, and we randomly found our game in those lists. So like if you can find the niche that you're working in, if you can get in front of those audiences and find the people for your game, then you can go to the publisher and be like, look, we found our audience, we've got our people. So not to say that they're going to guaranteed purchase the game, but the idea is that there's enough interest there. That is a good resource to go to the publisher with, of like, you can play it yourself. You can see that we're growing an audience. All we need is just to not focus on paying health insurance. If I could focus on making a game instead, publisher, that'd be great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, we were always very open about the process. We did live streams of how we animate it. We show our progress weekly. We've without getting any narrative points on what's happening in the story, but there was enough artwork to kind of show and keep an audience interested in it. So we were always very public with what the game's going to look like, how it's going to play, and what it might be in store if you're interested in following us. So I know some people take a different approach. Everything's lock and key, but we're kind of an open book about how we approach our animation at the studio. For instance, we would literally animate live to show you how we're doing this frame by frame, and people seem to respond to that. So I recommend showing the process. We're not going to give away any story points, so you're still going to be able to play an interactive story with these graphics, but you can get an idea of what it could look like.
I also have another question.
Sure.
Specifically for your team of 5 that you said, a lot of times, speaking from my own experience, like me and the people that I tried to work with sort of like lost the direction that we wanted to follow as we were like fantasizing about what the game would look like. How were you guys able to sort of like stay on track altogether, sort of like going towards having that one product that everyone agrees on?
We kind of handed the reins over to Greg to like, he's overseeing the project. He's writing it. He's kind of in charge of like what we need to get done and stuff like that. So I'd recommend like a production manager of sorts to kind of get the overall scope. While then each one of us we have 2 programmers, 2 artists, and Greg kind of overseeing everything. I just focus on character animation, and that's how I kind of keep my horse blinders on. Then Greg will tell us what we have to do that week and stuff. So that's sort of like, you definitely need the tip of the spear to like keep driving it forward, because if we're 5 people just doing it 5 different directions, that's not going to be a cohesive game. And it just, it would be a miracle if it worked out any other way. So definitely someone kind of in charge of everything. And then everyone else, I'd recommend sort of buckling down on what their strengths are to kind of get to that next level.
Yeah, there are a couple of hurdles that are in specific people's lanes that are pretty obvious on what to do with your project, to be like, all right, so if we're going to have this game, we need to have it animated for so many frames, and we need to have it be able to be controlled by people. So for the most part, that's blocking and tackling. Like, your animators know what to do, your programmers know what to do. At that point, it is constantly building a list of the most important parts and then reorganizing it to the what should be at the top. So we sort of like tentatively had a story, and then we cut it down, we rewrote the story like I think 3 times now. And when we do, we reshuffle like what order. We're not going to build all the levels in consecutive order. We're not going to build level 1, level 2, level 3. We're going to build we're going to jump around in order to say which are the most important story beats, and then work them together. The idea being, if we have to get to a certain point and say like, all right, we're done working on it, we have to work on the next section of the game. It is far easier than to be like, oh, we didn't do the last 40% of the game. Like, we're going to get all of our story beats in, and then we're able to flesh out the experience from there. And we just need to continuously evaluate, like, are we doing the most important thing? And then those kind of things.
All right, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Of course.
I think I'll ask one last question to kind of like close us out. And this is the one that, again, I think that is usually sort of the one that is in the back of everybody's mind. It's sort of like, what advice would you give somebody coming out of school right now, right, to just keep it going? This project that you're working on now, you mentioned that, it's gone through a real process just in terms of like changing what the focus was, but also it's been in the percolator. It's been there just like cooking for a while. And it's clear that your recommendation is not to wait 20 years for the project to be ready to do the project, but what would your recommendation to be to students who are coming out of school and have all of these skills and all these energy and ideas, how to just kind of keep that moving forward?
I recommend working with a team that you get along with really well, that you can bounce ideas off, that you're not afraid to ask questions, you're not afraid to say, this isn't working, stuff like that. I think team's very important, a close-knit team. For me, I can only really answer stuff from an animation perspective and how I got started and stuff. I know nothing about programming, and I play a lot of video games, but I certainly couldn't make one on my own. So, for me, it's just practice drawing, animate every day, don't look, like, if we looked at this from like, we have to have a finished game in date Y or date X, and we just looked at it, it's like, where do you start? It's like, don't think of it kind of like Greg said, take these important parts and then break those down into what can you do daily to achieve that thing. Because once you start biting off these little things of progress, you'll look back in a week or a month and a year and be like, well, if I thought like in the beginning of this year I'd get here, yeah, I would have been so overwhelmed, I would have been paralyzed with not being able to make it. So sort of, think of the end goal and then break it down into daily digestible chunks to get finished and sort of take it from there. it's really, we can only just do one task at a time anyway, so might as well approach it from that lens.
I view experience as experience. So if you've got a passion project you want to work on, that's awesome. If your goal is to just work in games and work in the industry, then that's great too. I think that Chris and Bob, you learned a lot about games from doing game trailers or doing cutscenes or doing different parts of the game. I've worked in QA before, I've worked in community management before, I've worked in game design before, and I think that I needed all of those experiences to make this game that I have now. So if you're, it never hurts to learn more about either your specific role or the industry or how the roles work all together. So I keep learning, keep trying, and I think that milestone approach that we've talked about a couple of times, where we used to use festivals, but you can really, pick a measure of like, all right, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it in increments, and if you have an hour to do a day, then you've done an hour's worth of work. That's great. Just continue to plug at it where and when you have the time to do it, and count all of your time. If we're preparing a tweet, that's important because you need the audience to play your game. If you're doing a character sketch, that's great. If you're having a meeting with the rest of your teammates, that's good too, because you need to communicate with everybody else that you're working with. So building a game, while it's not always sitting down and writing code, there's a lot to it. It could be all these things, and just it's good to have the bandwidth to try to tackle all these things. I know they have to come concurrently, but you can do it.
Thank you so much. This is really fantastic advice. Thank you so much for the great talk. And let's give you all, Greg and Chris, a round of applause now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very generous of you to come here and open your process for us and tell us a little bit about your exciting game. If we want to follow the progress of this as it's being made, we know how to find it. It's baked into the name #Blood. We'll find you on Twitter at Exit 73 Studios. Thank you again, Greg and Chris, so much for coming by today to the MICA Game Lab. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thanks for having us. It was a pleasure, and always happy to talk. So you can reach out anytime.